We are at milepost 7 on South Mission Road. Not far from Mission San Javier, not far from Tucson, we're not far from Saurita. And a human being disappeared here in the spot where we're standing.
This is an individual who was found with no other personal effects, no clothing, no backpack, nothing. Found on the Tohono O'odham Nation in August of last year, 2018. The condition of his remains suggests to us that he probably lay out there for 1 to 3 months.
Nancy was from Lima, Peru. She had 2 daughters who lived in New York. She hadn't seen them in years. She was getting extremely depressed. And when she lost her job in 2009, that was the last straw, and she took off north. Nancy had dyed her hair white to look older so that she wouldn't be abused or raped during her journey.
This is the humerus, the upper arm bone, that we can see on him, and one of the reasons we know he's a teenager is that that bone hadn't fully fused. So there was cartilage between this part of the bone and the main part of the bone, so he could have gotten taller.
She took buses all the way through Central America and Mexico, and then she joined up with a coyote, with a guide, and another group of other migrants. They crossed the international boundary pretty quickly on foot, and then they were met by a vehicle that drove them north. Border Patrol pulled up behind them. Everyone who could escape the van ran out into the desert, including Nancy. From there, she was just missing, and the family began what would be a years-long process of trying to find out what happened.
Right now, we don't know who he is. We have no leads to his identity.
As soon as Nancy disappeared, the family actually flew out to this area and searched the desert themselves, interviewed witnesses. I met with them in a hotel off the side of I-10 and took a missing persons report, tried to go to report at police where they were turned away. They went to Border Patrol themselves. They visited consulates.
We're hoping that his mother or his father or another family member eventually reaches out and tells us that he went missing. Not only is loss, personal loss, a tragedy, this limbo, this not knowing if they're alive or dead, and if they are dead, has the body been found but nobody has put 2 and 2 together, or are they still laying out there? Part of what we do here is to determine how somebody died, the manner of death, the cause of death, and then help law enforcement with identification.
We now know that actually her remains were found in 2011, about 3.5 miles north of here. It took, however, until 2017 for that cranium that was found to be identified as Nancy's.
We've had a slow motion mass disaster played out over the last 19, 20 years. 3,000 people have come into this office for a post-mortem examination. Some were bodies of people who died that day or the day before. Other people were just represented by a single sun-bleached bone. Of those 3,000, 2,000 have been identified as a specific individual, all from south of the US-Mexico border. We're on the Tohono O'odham Nation, the San Javier district, and we're working with Tohono O'odham Police Department on these 2 mock death scenes, if you will.
That's at 6'4".
One is a typical scatter of remains by animals of somebody who dies on the desert floor. And the other one's somebody who dies in a dry wash. And then their body decomposes, it skeletonizes, and then when the waters come, as we know they always will, some of the bones get washed downstream.
This is kind of exposed, ready to be photographed, and then removed.
We always like to talk to the law enforcement officers who are responsible for recovering these remains, because we do very few recoveries. The Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner, very rarely do we send an anthropologist or pathologist or an investigator out to a scene. So we're almost totally reliant on the skills of law enforcement officers.
That's going to indicate I've got two individuals. Am I going to be able to see, you know, oh, well, that other left tibia was found 100 yards from here.
We want them to be as thorough as possible, which means not only covering the widest area that makes sense, but while you're in that area, pay close attention to bones that can turn the color of the sand. It's not very pleasant at times. Some of the sights are horrific, some of the smells are horrific. Using your hands, gloved hands on a decomposing body is an assault to several of your senses. These folks lived a hard life, and their skin and their teeth and their bones reflect these stressors that have accumulated. In this young man's case, he didn't live too long, but he still has some of these childhood stress marks written on his bones.
Something that I observed about Bruce Anderson in the early 2000s, he wrote by hand hundreds of missing persons reports. Families were calling him, and he didn't turn them away. It wasn't the right place. You know, a forensic anthropologist usually isn't taking missing persons reports. Usually you refer that to police. Bruce knew that they couldn't go to police. I started typing all of his handwritten missing persons reports into a database. One of them was for a Guatemalan woman. He had stapled a beautiful picture of her wearing traditional Guatemalan traje to his handwritten report. And in addition to her name and the date of disappearance and her age, he'd written on the margin a note that said, "She was a nice person." And that stood out to me. It was the representation of someone who was not only collecting data as a scientist, but also listening to a family and being there with them in that moment of crisis.
I know that my best day as a forensic anthropologist is gleaning some really important information that can lead to an identification. That then becomes the worst day a mother or a wife could ever have, because now we know this John Doe has been identified as their son or their husband. So I have to temper, I think most of us do, temper our satisfaction with ourselves of doing a good job by knowing that that's the outcome.
Forensic anthropology can not only identify one individual person, but it can also show patterns across many cases.
The genetic estimate of all living humans is that we're 99.9% alike. In my job, I can do a better service if I can find some of those differences.
There's a quote from Ruth Benedict that the purpose of anthropology is to make the world safe for human difference. It's a very precise science that can come to interact with very deep human need for answers, for truth, and for justice.